We've been talking a lot about power on TLDR recently, and for us, power normally comes in the presidency or prime ministerial flavours, not actual, power. But recently the UK has seen huge increases in power prices, the EU is on the brink of a major argument over electricity sharing, and some provinces in China have been forced to turn out the lights. One more country was caught up in the power chaos recently, and that's Lebanon, whose ongoing power issues reached boiling point this weekend when their power grid went dark for 24 hours. So let's explain what's happening in Lebanon right now. Before we get going, you might have noticed me very subtly promoting our other videos on TLDR UK and EU. And if you want to check those ones out, they're linked in the description. And you probably ought to subscribe while you're there to make sure you're fully in the loop for the news happening everywhere. Back to Lebanon though. On Saturday, it was announced that the country had run out of power. Like, totally out of power. The government told Reuters that the Lebanese power network completely stopped at noon today, and it is unlikely that it will work again until Monday, or for several days. This is clearly bad. A country entirely running out of power obviously isn't a good thing, especially if it's expected to last for a while. So how did the country find itself in this position? Well, it's not actually a new issue. A full power outage might be an eye-catching news revelation, but the country's been struggling with an economic crisis and associated fuel shortages for the last 18 months. In fact, in that time, the country's GDP has fallen from 55 billion to 33 billion, with many attributing this to bad economic policy and corrupt public servants using the system to fund their already extravagant lifestyles. This not only drained the country's finances, but also hurt their currency, the Lebanese pound, which has fallen in value by 90% since 2019, with huge ramifications for the government, businesses, and individuals. So much so that about half of the country's population currently live in poverty. It's this currency issue, though, that made the power problem yet worse. That's because Lebanon imports huge amounts of fuel from overseas. Fuel which in turn is used to power the country's power plants and thus produce electricity. With the value of their currency falling, the relative cost of fuel for Lebanon has soared, making electricity expensive and scarce, an issue only exacerbated by the country's lack of foreign currency reserves. In fact, shipments of fuel headed to Lebanon were withheld due to this very issue. Ships laden with gas oil waited in Lebanese ports with the owners refusing to unload until the country transferred the fees owed in US dollars due to concerns that they would never be paid otherwise. Actually, fuel isn't even the only issue when it comes to imports at the moment. Pharmacists across the country have been striking recently due to a shortage of medicine, a shortage which, you guessed it, is driven by the country not being able to afford the bills of their foreign suppliers and manufacturers. When it comes to electricity though, the lack of fuel issue really came to a head when the country's two largest plants ground to a halt following a fuel shortage on Friday. Given that these two plants alone generate 40% of the nation's electricity, this wasn't good news. And unsurprisingly, it was only a day later when the penny finally dropped and a countrywide outage was announced. Now, blackouts like this aren't all that unusual in Lebanon. The country hasn't had 24/7 electricity for a very long time. Actually, the issue is so commonplace that many people have their own generators to top up the official infrastructure. This way, private citizens can generate their own power when the electricity grid goes down. What makes this time different, though, is it wasn't just a short outage. In the end, power did return on Sunday, a day later, but the outage was predicted to last much longer. Some would have been able to last that long, but many wouldn't, without the means of generating electricity, and now living in an even more perilous spot. Actually, even those with generators weren't in the best position, and that's because diesel, what powers the generators, is also in short supply, and, unsurprisingly, there's a lot of demand. So not only is the price of diesel going up, but generating your own power is also looking a lot less attainable. It's hard to quite comprehend how major an issue this is. It's not just being unable to charge your phone or watch TV. Power outages like this have huge ramifications across the board, from health to even basic things like water. And due to this shortage in particular, water in some areas began to get more scarce, with many areas even implementing water rationing. That's because water pumping stations are powered by diesel fuel too, which, as you know, is getting harder and harder to find. As I said though, fortunately the outage lasted less time than many feared, including the government themselves, with power actually only being out for 24 hours. So everything's sorted, right? Well, no. Initially, the army stepped in to fill the gap, donating 6 million litres of fuel that it was holding to bring back power immediately, although that fuel will only last for about 3 days. The government has also stepped in to put an end to the more medium-term issue, with the central bank issuing $100 million to spend on fuel and electricity generation. But even that's clearly not a sustainable answer to this crisis. This will allow the country to begin purchasing fuel from abroad again, which is obviously good news, but it's not a solution. Power might be back now thanks to the donation and to the spending, with officials even remarking that they're back to pre-blackout levels of power generation, but now's not the time to breathe easy. The country's economic crisis rumbles on, continuing to impact millions, pushing yet more into poverty, and many still only receive a couple of hours of power each day, as they did pre-blackout. In fact, even before this crisis, the impact of broader power shortages was obvious, with hospitals forced to suspend operations or halt vital procedures due to issues with electrical supply. With no clear solution to the root issue, it's hard to see how this issue solves itself. The power might be back for now, but the bigger economic crisis isn't even close to being resolved. And with fuel and diesel getting only more expensive as the currency collapses, this isn't the end of issues like this. Actually, it may also highlight a bigger issue. Hezbollah, the Shia militant group who form part of the government, but are designated as a terrorist group by countries around the world, may be able to gain even more power as a result of crises like this. The group were able to buy truckloads of fuel from Iran via Syria over the last month, violating US sanctions. Sanctions which do make fuel issues like this worse. But because of the group's willingness and ability to flout the sanctions, they're able to procure things that others aren't. And with fuel as important as it is, this kind of power could end up enabling and boosting Hezbollah yet further. Something that many would argue is even more undesirable than the power issue itself. What can be done for Lebanon? And what, if anything, should your country be doing in this case and in similar incidents around the world? Comment your thoughts down below. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description.